It all starts, though, Dominic, with that main event from UFC 284. Islam Makhachev retains his lightweight title. He gets the win via unanimous decision over the featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski. I'm just going to, as the start of the conversation, Dom, I'm just going to present you with some history here. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
You can debate the term super fight or mega fight. There's no doubt this fight applies. But
Yep.
in terms of what fights in UFC history apply to that, sure, you could really pick and choose like some of the biggest fights in UFC history and argue that they are a super fight or a mega fight. However, I think the most basic way to determine a super fight, champion versus champion, is
Mm.
obviously a super fight. And Dominic, there have been 7 of those now in UFC history after last night. And I'm just going to
Mm.
go through the list for you, and
Okay.
you can tell me, and we'll when I get to the end, I'll ask you a question. So,
Of course.
our last one, Dom, UFC 232, Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, the first fight night on ESPN, Henry Cejudo versus TJ Dillashaw.
Mm-hmm.
UFC 226, Stipe versus Daniel Cormier.
Yep.
UFC 205, Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. UFC 94, GSP versus BJ Penn. And technically, this one, I'm throwing this one in there, even though it really isn't, it's not UFC champion versus UFC champion, but it was billed as champion versus champion. That's UFC 75, where the UFC's light heavyweight champion at the time, Quentin Rampage Jackson, fought the Pride champion Dan Henderson, who had decided to the
Mm.
UFC.
Okay.
So it was billed as champion versus champion. So I threw it on there. But you can argue if that really should be on there. So that right there, that is 7 super fights in my eyes. If you are champion versus champion, that is a super fight. That's a mega fight, no matter which way
Mhm.
you draw it up. You can argue for a lot of other fights. As DC versus John Jones, all these, yeah.
Of
GSP,
course.
Bisping, all those.
Right.
But basically, right there, those are the clear 7 super fights in UFC history. My question for you, Dom, is super fight in UFC history?
Oh, the best you say, man. Um, I probably
There's
go.
definitely recency bias to this one, but
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of recency bias is the problem. But man, I mean, we're talking a fight in last night that went all 5 rounds, tit for tat, razor close, all the way down to the final judges' scorecard. So yeah, I mean, I think I probably do go there because you know what? I would say like the only one that would like rival it in terms of like a full on fight would have been the third installment of DC Stipe, but that one wasn't champion versus champion. You know what I'm saying? So I think if we're talking just those 7, which is crazy by the way, 30 years we're going on in the UFC and there's only been 7. That's quite an elite list there. I would have to go this one. And it's just number. We're talking. Not only was it champion versus champion, but then you add in the number 1 versus number 2, and just all the stakes and the legacy, the win streaks. It doesn't really get much better than what it was last night, Noah.
I completely agree with you. Again, could you argue other fights should be in there? But on that list I just listed off, that is by far the best fight on that
Yeah,
list. I'm
yeah.
not saying it's the biggest. I'm not saying it's the one that sold the most or is going to sell the most. But in terms of hype versus what we got, no
Mm,
fight has exceeded expectations more than UFC 284's Volkanovski versus Makhachev. This was just this was a fight for the fans in a lot of ways, Dom, because neither guy felt like they were in a ton of danger for the majority of it. Yeah, at one point, or maybe a couple different points, Volkanovski had his back taken by Makhachev. But after the first time, the way Volkanovski was so calm about being in that
yeah,
position, it just kind of made you go, huh, well, I guess he is okay. So
yeah.
neither guy really felt like they were ever in all that much danger. And typically that hurts the quality of a fight. You kind of want that second level of investment where you see guys in compromising positions nearly on the
Hmm.
brink of being finished. It adds a lot of interest in the fight. But here, Dom, this was white knuckle on the edge of your seat just the whole time, all 25 minutes, Dom. I was leaning forward with my hands on the couch, ready to just burst if something crazy happened. And the way the fight just kind of flowed was beautiful. Round five, where Islam basically had the fight pretty much won. I know there is some debates about scorecards. Like some people, like you, actually scored it 3-2 Volkanovski. I had 3 Makhachev. So
Hmm.
the judges had it. I guess two of them had it 3-1 Makachev going into that round.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't
You're
know.
right, and one judge had it 4-0.
Whatever. Yeah. So 3-1 going in. Okay. Huh, that's interesting. But going into that fifth round, when Volkanovski hurts Islam with about a minute left, and then by the time the bell rings, Dom, I don't know if I've ever actually done this with the fight before. There's been some fights that have been amazing. There have been a couple that I think are probably better than this one. But at the end of the day, I've never at the end went, God, I wish there was a round 6.
Mm,
God, I wish we could get a round 6.
yeah.
This was the fight that did that for me. So hats off to both combatants.
Yes.
Both guys somehow come out looking like, and I didn't know if that was really possible going in, Dom. You have this fight that is so massive for legacy, so much stakes to it. And part of the stakes is not just that the winner benefits so much from winning, but it's that the loser gets held back so much from losing.
Yeah.
A guy like Volkanovski with a win here, we were saying could have really catapulted himself into not just the best featherweight of all time discussion, but we're talking best fighter of all
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
discussion. Meanwhile, Islam is really still trying to etch his path, his career, kind of separate from the shadow of Habib, and he's done a great job of that. You look at what he did against Oliveira, but to go in here and beat the number one pound for pound fighter, I mean, that immediately puts you into that kind of discussion. Not necessarily best fighter of all time yet, but I'm talking like one of the best lightweights of all time.
Yeah.
Sure, it definitely is already in the discussion. And yet, when it was all said and done, Islam gets his hand raised. And now I'm hearing a lot of debates on if Volkanovski should even lose his number one pound for pound spot. Like, that's how he was here in
Yeah.
defeat. It was purely a rare feat in this sport because so much we talk about it a lot. UFC even does a little bit where the thrill and the agony. There's always for every guy that gets a belt wrapped around his waist and has the best of his life. There's a guy who just got did never going to be back in that spot, cut out of a job, whatever. There's always a give and take in the sport.
Of
But
course.
last night was truly a fight that was special because I felt like neither guy truly lost.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm lost. I'm at a loss for words following everything I just said there. It was truly just a magical fight. I would argue probably one of the best fights of all time. That's a bit of
Hmm.
recency bias for sure. But I think I gave it. I told you in like rating. I've been going back and watching big boxing
Hmm.
fights and MMA main events, and just kind of score to try to find my like top of all time. I think I gave this one a 94. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's a beautiful score. And again, I mean, we're really hitting this narrative home, but it can't be said enough. I feel like, Noah, when you have a fight this incredible, and then you add in all of the additional factors of, again, the pound for pounds, the champion versus champion, the 11 fight win streak versus the 22 fight win streak, just all of those factors into what was an amazing fight, regardless of if these were two champions or two people that just came into the UFC. That's what just sets this so much higher on that totem pole, man. And you're right. There was no thrill and agony on this night for this main event, there was thrill and thrill. There was no losers, regardless of what their scorecards and records say. Islam has cemented himself as just a phenomenal, great fighter for those that still had their doubts. When you look at like his strength of schedule and whatnot, but now he's really putting that to bed. He's really stating how good he is. And I'm excited to see what his next title defense could be. And for Volk to go up 10 pounds, very big size discrepancy here, and hold his all for 25 straight minutes, win rounds on the judges' scorecards is incredible. And he's already got his next featherweight, defense lined up. It was just everything in that co-main and main last night just worked so well together, I feel like. And it was just such a beautiful night to be a fan of this sport. That it was one of those types of nights.
Let's switch gears and address the big debate going on right now, Dom.
Mhm.
There was even a little bit of a debate in our own group chat, so I felt like we should talk about this because you actually didn't give an opinion on this. You decided to sit this one out. Maybe you were sleeping. But the debate being round discussion here. Volkanovski number 1, Islam number 2. Islam wins the fight. Do you believe that Volkanovski should still be number 1 pound for pound come Tuesday, I think, when the new rankings come out?
Listen, man, I wouldn't have any gripe either way, but if I'm answering, I think Islam should flip flop. It should be now Islam number 1 and Volk number 2, because at the end of the day, the number 2 pound for pound fighter, Islam Makhachev, beat the number 1 pound for pound fighter, Alexander Volkanovski. I understand Volk was the one making the sacrifice in a sense, right? Going up a weight class out of his comfort zone. I understand all that. And the pound for pound rankings are like, I don't know. I enjoy them probably a little more than others, but also at a time like this where people are debating, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, they don't really mean that much in the grand scheme of things. It just makes it look cool on a poster and stuff, whatnot. But yeah, I have no problem with Islam being number 1. It's not like he didn't deserve it. I mean, the guy's on a 12-fight win streak now himself. He's a champion. He's got a title defense. I mean, look, he beat Charles Oliveira the fight before that was on a 10-fight win streak. Then he stops Volkanovski's 22-fight win streak and a champion. Come on. If you have a problem with if they flip-flop or not, I think you just need to reassess, because it's just, who cares, man? I think it's pretty clear. I'll tell you this much. Regardless of who's 1 and 2 on Tuesday, these are the 2 best fighters in the world, and it ain't close. That's facts.
That was very beautifully said, Dom. I pretty much agree with everything you said. I hate pound for pound rankings. I'll be the first to admit it. And part of that's because depending on the fight that's being discussed, I find myself making a lot of statements that don't align with one another. I'm also the guy who said I felt like Usman should still be above Leon Edwards because of the way the fight went. Yes, Leon got the win. It was an awesome knockout. But I still feel like today, as we sit here, that Usman. But then I'm also the guy saying that Islam should flip with Volk because he beat Volk. So it's like, it's there's no winning this discussion. I kind of hate. That's why I just hate pound for pound rankings. So like, but even going in, like number 1 versus number 2 pound for pound doesn't mean much to me. But I viewed these guys as being the top 2 fighters in the anyway. So I did view them as number 1 and number 2. So that's why it felt big. Not because the UFC rankings had them at number 1 and number 2. It's because I've seen with my own eyes that they are number 1 and number 2. And after what happened, it sort of aligns with a lot of what we said going in, Dom, this idea. And we got to, and of course, as we do, whenever we talk about an Islam fight, I feel like we get some pushback when we try to give any credit to an opponent of his. But the whole point was that what is Islam going to do when he goes up against a guy who has no weaknesses? And we saw that, and it was impressive. I mean, for the majority of this fight, Dom, Islam stood and traded with Volkanovski. Yes, he was very opportunistic with his takedowns. He did land a few of them and definitely stole a round or 2 by doing that. But, I mean, Volkanovski, he was it's been almost like to a mythical status that these guys like Islam and Habib, their ability to get their hands on you and take you down, like you're not getting up. I don't know if I've ever seen it against
Right.
these two guys.
Yeah.
And Volkanovski did it like 3 or 4 times. I mean, it was just it was just I have no negatives to point out for either guy here. And
No.
I think anybody who nitpicks either performance here. I've seen a couple people talking about how Islam is somehow overrated or overhyped because of this fight. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I don't care what the odds were. I don't care how big of a favorite Islam was. Everybody knew that this fight was number 1 and number 2, the two best fighters in the world, and Islam performed like the number 1 fighter in the world. And he had an amazing quote, early contender for Hot Mic Award, Dom. He said, "You like, don't like, I'm the best fighter in the world."
Yeah.
Checkmate.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
I love it. I love it. And to add on to that, another Mike moment, not that it was hot Mike status, but it relates to what you were saying in terms of what we saw in the cage. I think Volkanovski put it quite perfectly. He underestimated Islam in the striking, and Islam underestimated Alexander in the grappling. And it played out just like that. It played out perfectly over the course of those 25 minutes. And that's what made it such an incredible fight, because Volk performed leaps and bounds better than I think what many imagined he could in the grappling. And Islam put all the critics to bed about what his striking looks like when they were on the feet. And it's just, fuck, man. It was just awesome. It was awesome. I'd love to see it run back again. The 6th round talk, I saw Brett said it. You just said it on this show. Like, yeah, now that I look back and think, I don't know if I've ever wanted a 6th round in a fight, or at least had that thought, but I sure the heck had it last night, and I sure the heck have it right now on Sunday morning. So what more can you say? If there is someone out there, like Noah just said, if you're critiquing this fight, you're critiquing either one of these guys, take a week off. Take a week off, reassess, come back stronger.
Get some help.
Yeah,
I'm just
right.
kidding. We're all just having fun here. But
yeah, we're having fun.
One last thing before we move on, Dom. We got to talk about what's kind of next for these guys, and I think that this is pretty clear and obvious for one, Volkanovski, and we'll do him second because that'll lead into our co-main discussion. Yeah. But as far as Islam Makhachev, it feels like it's less clear. So my question, Dom, is there any fight right now that could potentially be made for Islam Makhachev that you would rather see than Volkanovski and him running it back?
Oh, shit. You just had to throw that in at the end of the question, didn't you?
I threw that in. Yep.
I mean, no, let's just say it right here. The biggest fight the UFC can make right now is Makhachev Volkanovski too. No, but I would love to see that ran back, but I can take a break from it because I after Yair's performance, I want to see Volk and Yair. You know what I'm saying? So for Islam, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit in the fight announcements. It's kind of been like said, but nothing signed or official yet. What about Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush? Come on, baby. Give Beneil his title shot, guys. He don't need to fight Charles. Come on. If anyone deserves a fight for the title right now at 155, that's not Alexander Volkanovski. It's Beneil Dariush, man. It's Beneil. Come on. I'm sick of saying one more, Noah.
That's interesting,
I'm sick of saying it for Beneil. I've done it too much.
Yeah. Yeah. How many times am I going to have to hear that Beneil needs to take on the up-and-coming killer who's like ranked number 11 in the division? I mean, Dom is wanting Beneil to get murdered out here by everybody. But now I'm in a very weird predicament, Dom, because in order for Beneil to get that title shot, it looks like he's going to have to beat Charles Oliveira. And Dom, I'm torn. That is a fight. I can't watch that fight. I can't watch. These are two guys I've went at for the entire life of this podcast. That could be for the winner. Whoever wins that could be my nominee for the Joey this year. Like, that's how much I support those two. That, like, I'm like, it makes me want to cry that these two are fighting each other. I can we just like I agree with you. I'd rather Beneil just get the title shot, Charles
Yep.
fights someone else, and then hopefully
Yeah.
Charles wins and then he gets a title fight. Like just
Yeah.
can we not do this? Please? Please, I can't take it. I can't. So I would agree though that it feels like the next guy would be the winner of that fight if it happens in May as it's supposed to right now. But it feels like maybe is I mean I there is some factors for Islam that would make you think maybe he won't fight again until the fall.
Yeah.
If I remember right, the whole thing for Habib, and I know Islam is sort of in a similar boat, is Ramadan and how
Right.
that sort of wipes out the summer for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that would make sense that his next fight couldn't really be till what, September or October. That was typically how Habib sort of
Yeah.
went. It was like two times a year, fall, winter, spring, and then fall. So I get that. Yeah, the winner of that fight would be lined up pretty good to fight Islam next. If not them, I do think there is some contenders here, though, Dom, that I'm very interested to see Islam fight. Now that we've seen Islam, as amazing of a performance as it was, we've at least seen someone compete with him,
Yeah.
Alexander Volkanovski. We've seen someone put up a good fight, and even at the end of the fifth round, look like they were taking over that fight. That at least has made me more invested or more interested in seeing some of these contenders at lightweight get a shot. Rafael Fazayev or even
Yeah.
Arman Sarukian to get that fight again.
Yeah. For
Like,
sure.
or Beneil Dariush or whoever. Like, if Charles got another shot. Like, these guys, I feel like I at least have more hope for them to put up a fight and to maybe even get their hand raised, especially a guy like Arman who, yes, lost to Islam a while back, but it's so skilled everywhere that like I could really see that just being a very technical, a bit like this fight, like a B-rate version of this fight where they go 5 rounds and neither guy's getting a huge edge on the other, so it comes down to the scoring of those 5 rounds. And I'm lightweight in a good spot right now. I believe it. It feels like it's less clear. There's not a guy that just stands out immediately as the next challenger, but I think there's a lot of guys you could put in there and it would surprise you at how good the fight could end up being.
Oh yeah. 100%. 100%. Couldn't have said it any better.
And for